The Way of White is the oldest and most powerful cultural organization centered around the veneration of the gods of Anor Londo, and its goal is to maintain their influence on the world of men and keep extending the Age of Fire. After Lord Gwyn sacrificed himself to link the first flame, his throne passed to his firstborn son, who, however, chose to ally with the dragons, the ancient enemies of the gods, and was therefore exiled, and his name eradicated from history. Taking advantage of the situation, and thanks to the fact of being Gwyn's uncle, Lloyd rose to power, proclaiming himself king of the gods. He then became the main deity of the religion, known as the god of law and caste, and his face was even minted on the golden coins used by men. After all of the deities had abandoned Anor Londo, Lloyd moved his seat of power to the region of Thorland, which then became the cultural and political center of the Way of White. The god had absolute power over the country, and thus chose among the nobles of the region the ones who would become his apostles and high priests of the Way of White, gifting them holy rings to increase their magic and making their duty the protection of law and social classes. In addition, Thorland's clerics showed off their rank with their robes, and those of high rank obtained talismans that worked even without faith, but thanks to Lloyd's divine protection. Under Lloyd, the Way of White became also a militant religion, and Lloyd's cleric knights became famous for being unyielding in battle, using blessed axes and fighting and healing miracles. The god also began a tradition of hunting the undead, seen as cursed creatures, for which his warrior clerics were widely praised, and for which they developed special amulets to combat their prey. However, Lloyd's own knights lived in terror of his duels of judgment, in which the verdicts were carried out by his sword of law, demonstrating how in reality Lloyd's government was paranoid and totalitarian. In addition, clerics dissatisfied with the teachings of the church were effectively exiled into spiritual journeys to test their faith, which were considered self-purification rituals to return them to the doctrine. During the rule of Lloyd, depicted with a halo, some miracles of his Way of White were associated with similar aureoles of light. The Way of White also developed divine embers, artifacts capable of infusing weapons with the holy magic of the gods, to enhance their cleric knights and help them hunt undead and necromancers. These embers were exclusive property of the church, and selected blacksmiths were trained to the arts of divine smithing. As an additional resource, even large divine embers were created to further ascend weapons through a secret rite of the church, making them as powerful as the weapons of the gods. At some point, the Way of White created its first undead paladin among one of Havel's soldiers. Paladin Leroy was given golden armor, Grant and Sanctus, two legendary weapons, and blessed with a white flame to be effective against the dark. The paladin was sent to Lord Rannon, the first undead mission of the Way of White. Later, there were further undead missions, with the aim of seeking out kindlings, the secret rite of feeding bonfires with humanity. One included Rhea of Thorland, last daughter of the royal house of Thorland, accompanied by the two soldiers Vince of Thorland and Nico of Thorland. When Dark Son Gwyndolin emerged from hiding and resumed his place as king of the gods, thanks to his direct descent from the previous King Gwyn, he also assumed command of the Way of White and became its main deity. The religion went through a major reform, and Lloyd was cast out, and his personal cult forgotten by the followers of the Way of White, so much so that now the clerics openly declare that he was a derivative fraud and that his title of king was self-proclaimed. Yet the undead hunts he instituted continue to persist. Some of the dethroned god's followers, now cast out as heretics, would find refuge in the painted world of Ariandel, bringing with them the lost miracles of the old religion, and fully believing that one day the Orioles of Light associated with Lloyd would return with him. Over time, the region of Karim took on greater and greater importance in the religion, to the point that the local religious leader obtained the title of Archbishop. In Karim, the Way of White had great cultural growth, resuming not only training maidens and missions in distant lands, but even firekeepers who could support the tradition of linking of the first flame. Thus, the study and reading of the ancient legends from the sacred books by the widely recognized saints continued. Furthermore, the faith placed in the words of the blind became important, to the point of producing braille tomes filled with advanced miracles. Archdeacons, among the highest ranks of the Way of White, also wore finely decorated holy garb as a sign of their position. At some point, the knight Morn arrived in Karim and became the apostle of the archbishop, and together they labored to bring comfort to the suffering. Morn introduced Karim to Keitha, goddess of tears, his goddess, whom he had served with dedication, spreading her healing miracles and her cult. Over time, Morn's influence grew to such an extent that Karim's cathedral was decorated with lined stone heads modeled on his helm, and knights who demonstrated the most strength and faith were bestowed with replicas of his armor and hammer. However, the clerics of Karim also began to freely devote themselves to the creation of forbidden rings, and to use chimes that draw upon the intelligence of the user, together with their faith, to cast miracles that lean towards the dark, whose existence is concealed in the name of the Archbishop of Karim, for they are anathema, implying that the goddess leaves a lot of freedom for her clerics to investigate the dark. The Way of White built a cathedral dedicated to the goddess Keitha, and with the aim of cleansing humans from the stagnant darkness within them that was becoming an ever-increasing problem, using the sacred and peaceful body of water on which the structure was built to contain all the remnants from its cleansing rituals, and even sent 3 archdeacons to manage it. At a certain point, the king of the gods, Gwyndolin, was struck by an illness, and Sullivan took advantage of it, locking the god in the old abandoned cathedral of Anorlondo, and self-proclaiming himself pontiff, thus assuming command of the Way of White. This caused a schism within the Way of White, as the Church of Karim and its archbishop did not recognize Sullivan's authority, separating themselves from the denomination of the other archbishops, who kept following the Church of Irithyll.